effectively being ostracized, but I do have a relationship with my older brother Mark and my younger sister Dorothy, who have both left as well.
So I know your dad's ventures are mostly bankrolled through lawsuits in various cities and towns that they visit, is that correct?
Well, you know, I've heard that. I know that the majority of the money that they use to do their protests around the country comes from the income that they make there. Most of the wage earners give about a third of their income to the church, which then uses the money to fund the protests.
Hi, Nate.
Hi.
I used to live in Topeka back in 93 to 95. I actually worked at Channel 27 there.
Okay. Yeah.
And I actually met your father one-on-one. He's a lot different when there's no one around. But my question is, when you moved to Canada, was that any particular reason to help you deal with the influence of your family, or was there ever reasons?
No, yeah, I just had gone through a divorce and met a gal, and she's Canadian, so that's what sent me out there.
As far as you know, anytime during the protests, have there been other people that have joined in with your father, or have they all been against your father? And do you know of any outside funding sources like anti-war groups that are helping to fund your father's work?
No, I don't think there's anything like that. They generally will not accept contributions from outside the church. I know from time to time there'll be the occasional person who'll show up and put their own signs. Typically, they'll even run them off because they won't have the right theology as far as father's concerned.
Hi. So you said that they don't want to convert anybody, and they don't really just think they're going to heaven. So what's the point of all the protesting? What are they?
Well, my father has always thought that his job here on earth is to condemn the world. That's his responsibility. That's how he translates those passages. God's the one making those decisions, and his job is to go out there and condemn the world with their sins, so that fertilizes the ground, if you will, for repentance, if repentance is there.
Hi. So you talked about your story to critically, and I think a lot of us struggle with faith and with what to do with what to taught as children. So did you ever come to any sort of terms with your faith, and if so, what did you come to the conclusion of?
What do I believe today? I guess the best title would be I'm a strong agnostic today, but I'm still on the journey.
Hi. You mentioned briefly some of the struggles that you went through, particularly raising your children and trying to teach them differently than you were taught. And I was curious if you had any suggestions for people that went through something similar, and what you found as a source of strength and what you turned to as resources.
Yeah, I don't really look at that part of my life as one where I consider myself a leader. This is the best way to say it. I struggled through, I used my mind a lot. Was the process that I went through. Some people, I think that's temperament more than anything else. I relied on processes to walk my way through until I was able to get past an issue emotionally. I hope that answers your question.
Were you ever afraid of hurting your children since your father hurt you?
It's a very good question. Like I mentioned in the last answer, I spent a lot of time dealing with the question of discipline. I took with me my father's insistence that physical corporal punishment was a necessary aspect of discipline, kind of like that whole process I went through with kids at Pizza Hut, I just started thinking about, okay, I'm going to eliminate that option from my parenting. And when I made that decision on purpose, it was amazing how quickly that space filled in with really creative ideas for raising kids to be prepared for the world and not have unnecessary fear.
Hi. Well, I actually have two questions. Sorry, but the first one is, how do your children respond to that kind of parenting? Like, what are their religious views now, if they have any?
As I understand it, they're somewhat agnostic in their own view about religion right now, but they're not antagonistic toward religion. They're fairly liberal in their social policies. I know my daughter Haley was an active, she was actively involved in campaigning against Proposition 8 out in California, which you're probably aware of what that is. I think they turned out great. I actually read that Supreme Court decision several times, and I was very partial to Justice Scalia's dissenting opinion, because that's kind of the arguments he raised were pretty much in line with what I've been saying for a couple of years. And that is that living in Canada, I've been able to look at America from the outside. But I also have my experiences in America, and I understand the fervent love for our Constitution and those rights, and we should love them. They protect us from government encroachment. So I get that. But Canada has moved a little further to the left, if you will, and said, you know, some things just aren't appropriate. A lot of times Americans like to say that Canada has become, you know, the good enough principles, and that's extreme in itself. They have what they call a more responsible approach to that issue of free speech. And so I have to admit that probably I was influenced by that over the last 5 years. But I think more importantly is this issue of protesting at funerals is not something that I can imagine anybody sitting there 250 years ago trying to imagine issues that America would deal with. And no one ever said, well, wait a minute, folks, what if someone decides to pick at a funeral? It's unimaginable, okay? And we talk about the rights of parents to raise their children and not have that parental right infringed on. That's not in the Constitution. It's a right we live with and we protect with our laws. We haven't had to discuss the issue of the right for people to bury their loved ones in peace. Didn't need to. There was no reason to. And I don't think they've given enough attention and consideration to that issue, because I think that should be looked at as a right just as powerful and just as important as our right to speak freely. And it doesn't. I don't think we weaken that right by saying, speak freely, just not there and not then. That's all we're saying.
I just want to say thank you for your strength and your sacrifice. And my question is a little more personal about coping mechanisms, because you described some really sort of horrific experiences as a kid with your family, and you have a lot of siblings. And I'm wondering, one, whether you had any sort of group response to the way your father handled things. Like, did you talk to each other outside of the control that he obviously exhibited? And then also, you mentioned mental health later on in life, PTSD, and I'm wondering what your family's ideas about mental health services might be.
When we talk outside the situation, there was a lot of discussion outside of it. What you really saw, which was quite interesting, was because there was such tight control that when we left that environment, when we were outside of his influence, we were pretty wild. We were doing stuff that kids just had no business doing, which is an interesting point to look at when you're thinking about raising your own kids, right? What was the second one?
Mental health services. What was the philosophy, I guess, in the family?
Yeah, my father, as I found is true oftentimes with a more rigid fundamentalist theology, you have no patience for mental health. My father wouldn't in a million years subject himself to the thoughts of the counselor.
Ethan, so I have a sort of a close relationship with your family because I've organized about 50 counter protests. I've gotten to know your family fairly well through these counter protests. They know me, surely they know me and talk to me. And actually, it's kind of a love-hate that they get to change their times and they say, "Stop following me, stop getting here before we do." And it's really funny at times. But what I discovered through the counter protests is that what do you feel is going to happen the day your father does pass away? There's such a matriarchal, the women are sort of leading this. What's going to happen to this sort of house of cards when this patriarchal system that has been so put in place? And that's something I just kind of look at that. There's not another male figure that's sort of in the background.
Yeah, and their official answer is that we're not going to worry about that. God will reveal that later. But a more important answer to that I think speaks to it better is that my father truly believes, and it's not hyperbole, it's not rhetoric, he truly believes that he's not going to die. And he believes that the people there are not going to die. They're operating on a timeline right now where they believe that sometime in July of 2012, the tribulation will begin, and that they will be taken up in heaven, and the rest of us are going to be left here to deal with the fallout. They did their job, they tried, nobody listened. So that speaks to that question far more significantly, I think, because when my father dies, and he will die, because a doctrine that kind of flows from that now. It was kind of there when I was a child, but it's strengthened and increased over the years is the death and illness is God's judgment. So when the spirit carrier and the leader is judged, what is that going to do to himself? I used to say very matter of fact that I thought it would fall apart when he died. I watched Shirley and three of the others absorb my father's rage and hatred. It could carry on in some form. I think it just shadowed what it was. So.
We have time for 3 more questions. So if you're a CHS student, still have a question you'd like to put.
I just want to play the devil's advocate for a little bit. And you talked a lot about how your father created a lot of pain and fear in your life, but supposedly every coin has 2 sides. So was there any aspect of your father's character that helped you grow in a positive way? Or was it just...
I mean, that's a fair question. Clearly, I was influenced by my father. Clearly, I took the question of religion and of God very seriously.